Hello, my lovely friends. Welcome to Poker Mind Expansion Episode 2. So, today I want to continue my discussion about half truths, and we'll see where we left off. But I think that it's very, very important to take a look at the problems that we're solving in poker before we jump to solutions. If we don't know what the problem is, how can we find the solution? This presupposition that we know the problems to solve, so let's jump into solutions. Well, this is what I want to break down, and this is what I want to think deeply about. But I want to introduce some methodologies to also make us more conscious, expand our minds to be able to think about the multiplicity of variables that we will have to consider when it comes to actually solving the right problems. We cannot borrow anybody else's information. And any sort of trust that you have within me may actually be a deception upon yourself. Because in fact, it's quite possible that then you are simply believing the words that I'm saying. So we're not trying to form any new beliefs. What we're trying to see is the fact that this conflict solution framework which we're forced into is not reasonable for poker, but it's very hard to see this. So we're going to try to discuss this from a number of vantage points. And the problem with GTO and the poker community and training sites and all this is that the closer and closer you come to truth, the more the possibility is that you go astray. And this is basically because when you come closer to truth, when you realize that you cannot simply say GTO or I'm playing the player, exploitable versus GTO, when you realize the truth that there's no differentiation, that you cannot use one or the other, because if you use one and there's rake, you're just being a bit foolish. If you're intelligent enough to use GTO and you claim that you want to win money, then why don't you just exploit the people you're playing against? There are millions of questions that we can ask. But there's a very big blind spot, and this is the idea that because I'm studying GTO, keep in mind people are not studying game theory from first principle. If you actually study game theory, I give you big kudos. If you're looking at a solver, you don't know anything about game theory. If you don't actually understand why you bet, why you check, why certain things happen, and you've just memorized some words that someone else has said, this will be very, very challenging. And the reason why it's very challenging is because we feel we're very certain. We become very egoistic. Yes, I have the solution now. Now I know the answer. GTO is the solution. I have the solution, and nobody can hurt my feelings and say that my idea about what to do is wrong because I've proven that this is right. In fact, nothing is provable. So this is much closer to truth. Nothing is provable in any world whatsoever. First of all, a GTO solution is not a proven thing. Okay? First of all, it's not a proven thing. We're using a simulation that helps us find a Nash equilibrium solution. It has nothing to do with proving that you will make money, which is the whole reason why we're sitting behind the screen playing poker. We're not sitting behind a screen imagining that somehow us clicking a button that is consistent with what a Nash equilibrium solver output would be. This does not translate to money. What translates to money is understanding the right problems to solve. When our decisions are reduced to mere memorization of what a solution or what a simulation would give you to earn 0 in a game whose rake deficit is absolutely negative. Some games are taking 35 big blinds, 40 big blinds, 50 big blinds off the table per 100 hands. And someone has to lose that. And then you're not even exploiting your opponents. You're just trying to make 0. If you really understand what that means, but see, the brain it's very challenging for the brain to think outside of cause and effect. It's very hard for it to understand that EV is simultaneous. If you really think about a game tree, then we say, we think these are doing this, and we think he's doing that, and we think he's doing that. If we even sat with one hand for a day, we would realize how absolutely impossible it is. Even a toy game, a 2-street toy game with a fair amount of combos, how almost impossible it is to really go deep. When we start to think about, we think they do this, then we'll adjust like this way. Well, they go adjust this way. Well, what's our new strategy? This is real thinking. using our minds to think about what they're doing and how we adjust. And then we've adjusted this way. Now we don't just try to protect our new identified strategy. No, then we try to destroy our strategy and find a way to counter it. So there's no us and them. There's only our perception and our knowledge, our schema of poker. There's no us and them. There's simply the knowledge that we have about the game. When you come closer to the truth, a great desire arises to share it with people. You want to go to the GTO study groups, go meet on the forums, talk to people, confirm your ideas about how your hand was played well. But you've not attained it in its wholeness. You're simply borrowing knowledge from a solver. But you yourself do not understand the game from first principle. It's very dangerous to share a half-truth. Half-truths are much more dangerous than lies because they're absolutely powerful as truth, because the perceiver who is coming to YouTube to try to learn about how to get better does not have the knowledge to differentiate between what is actually going to help him. And the incentives of people who are selling a product is to make the buyer have the illusion that they are learning. Also, it will simultaneously be the case that they are learning, but it's not the most efficient method, because you think you merely watch a training video or you play with GTO Solver for an hour and you are entitled to understand how the game works. You are absolutely delusional. Our brains can understand the game, but not through memorizing a solution, through using. The supercomputer that we have, that is far beyond our comprehension, because what we can comprehend currently would just be our conscious. Look in front of us. What can we remember? We have a whole past of 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. How many years? How many friends have we had? How many subjects have we studied? How many books have we read? How many movies have we watched? How much music do we know? The supercomputer brain is infinite. But as long as we are reduced to mere memorization, what happens is that we are just building a house of cards. And the problem is that these things that we memorize are simply going to end up contradicting other things which we will try to run away from and we will suppress. So we will be in a hand and we will have a doubt that arises. I don't know if this is the correct play, whatever, but we will try to suppress this by believing that what we are doing is correct. Absolutely not. Belief is not the way to God. Only doubt is the way to truth. Only doubt is the way to mind expansion. Doubt is exactly what we have been taught to do the opposite of. Since the beginning, we've been told to memorize, believe, do not ask questions. Yet we're told to ask questions, but then we are shamed. That was a dumb question. That is not a right question. That question is not relevant. If someone has the capacity to say something is a stupid question, then they obviously have a very compartmentalized mind because they don't make associations very easily. There's no such thing as a stupid question. All questions have to be asked. There's no stupid question. But often we have the feeling that we need to suppress these doubts when we're in game and we're on King Jack 5. And we're thinking about, well, should we check our Jack 10 back or should we bet it? And we start having thoughts about what our opponent's doing, what would GTO say, all these different things. And very often we have an idea and then we want to say, yes, that's the right one. All the thoughts in our mind about the hand are absolutely equivalent. There's no like, this is a good thought and that's a bad thought. This is what happens is the mind tries to find an identity with a particular strategy in order to feel better. And this is not how to expand the mind. This is how minds become more narrow. But unfortunately, this is the training method for the vast majority of people. So lies are absolutely impotent. And this is very important to realize, that lies are not dangerous. They're not dangerous at all. We're at a casino, and we see a player UTG who folded at the end of the hand say, hey, look at my hand, look, and he grabs it out of the pile, which he's not allowed to do, and he slams it on the table and says, I had jacks. I folded jacks pre-flop UTG because I know that jacks is a very bad hand. Okay. So a lie is very easy to differentiate, even if it takes a little bit of time. Even if we go to the casino the first time and we're like, yeah, that guy's a good point, because every single time that we have jacks, whenever we lose, it's always a big pot, and whenever we win, it's a small pot. So we create this association like, wow, that's actually pretty logical, right? But as time goes on, we start to understand that there are more variables involved than that. And of course, we will figure it out. But a half truth can persist for one's entire poker career. In fact, many people may believe that memorizing solutions to game theory, or in fact not doing any game theory and only using pure intuition, which is also just as foolish, would be the best approach for their improvement. Now, of course, if they don't want to improve, it doesn't matter. Then this is I'm solving for how to become better at poker. And I'm solving for how to make the ceiling of our potential as high as possible before we start just looking for problems to solve because we're so uncomfortable in our skin and we have the thought, let's be a good poker player. So we look to any YouTube video that gives any bullshit advice. We look for a system because we need security. No systems work. Poker is so far beyond that. And if you're looking for systems, I absolutely understand. It's an egoic defense mechanism. Don't worry. It's absolutely fine. But there's a reason why we're here right now. Because we understand on some level that you cannot give or teach a system for poker. It is far beyond that. It is so far beyond that possibility. Now, in fact, this idea in poker for how to study through training sites and using GTO solver software, I could be wrong, but it would not surprise me if there were humans that were playing poker over the next couple of 100 years that continued to approach it this way. Rather than truth being realized and seeing that actually there are so many facets of this game, and we don't do ourselves service if we simply are trying to find a solution before we even think about how the game works. If we have a presupposition, yes, we've studied a lot, we've already got the framework, we've already got the schema, we know what's going on, we will be in a very, very dangerous place because it's very likely that part of what we believe is absolutely true. But we may not be able to differentiate the two things, the black and the white. So we need to be able to try to differentiate between these two different types of things. Now, it's very painful to be uncertain about things. This is one of the things is that we, as a Homo sapiens, we have this emotional system, and this idea of uncertainty, not knowing. First of all, of course, the only reason why we would even care is because there's a thought that arises, I need to care. And this is a previous belief. There's no problem with this belief, but it's important to be aware of this. It's very important to be aware of what is the unconscious mechanism that is actually running the machine. What is actually the unconscious mechanism which is creating the desire to find a solution rather than going very deeply into what the problems are. Solutions are immaterial, but asking the right questions absolutely are of the utmost importance. They're not immaterial, but they certainly are immaterial if you have not spent the time considering the problems. The problem with this, or the difficulty, is that someone would rather go to a computer and click a button than sit in silence alone and think about how to play poker. Rather than play a session for an hour or two and then get off and open a hand history, and rather than going to something that will give them certainty, they simply look at the hand history and they think about, what did my opponent think here? Why did he do what he did? Let me question myself. Why did I do what I did? This is much more difficult. This is much more painful because that doubt arises. And the doubt is that our opponents might be better than us, or that we may not be playing well. And then the reason why this might create some sort of emotional pain is we have the belief that this is bad, or this is not good. Somehow this arises, but this may be associated with, say, the idea that if we don't get this done, then somehow we will not have food or we will not have shelter. And this is a very, very valid idea given that we are playing for money and we are trying to eat. But if we have a bankroll that allows it and shelter is not a thing that we are going to lose because we're not making perfect decisions, or if we put ourselves in a situation where we are absolutely dependent on this great certainty, then we may actually need to consider things from a deeper place. So we always have to approach problems from first principle. We cannot start off with a presupposition in that we already have gone astray. GTO versus exploitative is simply an example of two sides of the same coin. But the human mind thinks in terms of opposites. And the education system that taught us A, B, C, D, Do, Re, Mi did not teach us about the idea of polarities, about the dialectics of life, which is absolutely necessary because the brain thinks in conflict solution. It does not ordinarily have the capacity in a very deep way to think about things as mutually arising, which is how poker actually fundamentally works when we are thinking strategically. Of course, we cannot think in, it's not like we do this, then they do that. No, we have an assumption of they are doing this. We have an assumption of we are doing this. But where does this come from? So we dig and we dig and we dig. But the more digging we do, the more it uncovers our ignorance. Ignorance is something to be absolutely cherished. There's a reason why children are so intelligent, because they are absolutely ignorant. That is why they are intelligent. But the mind wants certainty. Why does it want certainty? What is ignorance? What is intelligence? Intelligence is the ability to make free associations, the ability to not see a situation or something that triggers many different ideas and memories and automatically creates the same solution every single time. Because it's only geared around one specific type of board. We were check raised and we start going to, we don't consciously, but of course we have many memories. So this agent that we call we are a body, right? But then there are thoughts that arise in our mind. So when we are playing a hand and we are on, say, a board, it's not like, oh, people say, I have a bad memory, I have a good memory. All these things are just like collections of things inside of you. They've not gone anywhere. Things that happened to you 30 years ago, all of your experience is inside of you. It's inside of your brain, saved as a memory. If you think that you're apart from that, if you think that the totality of your brain doesn't have that capacity, then you don't understand your brain. And this is very, very, very important to realize that our brains have been reduced to mere machines that click buttons at cash registers. Or our brains have been reduced to mere machines that go to universities that try to memorize answers so we can get good grades, because the incentives of the education system are not in alignment with us being able to think for ourselves very critically. So the difference between a conflict and a polarity is very, very simple. But the human mind tends to think of things in terms of GTO versus exploitable. I don't even understand how they can be compared. They're concepts about another concept. The concept of poker. Poker is a concept, right? All there is that actually is real is a deck of cards. So we can obviously call poker a concept or an agreement of rules about how we play, and then the more intricate things, we can say things about that. So we can say this is a coin, but this side we're going to give it this label, and this side we're going to give it that label. But somehow we think that they're separate, because the brain has a very hard time simultaneously holding ideas, because the only way that an idea can come up is in opposition to another idea, or in comparison, which is not really very much different. But you take an example. Someone may say, I'm a pole apart from this person, right? But by you actually saying that, you're literally defining what it means. Now, poles are opposite ends of a magnet, or you could say that the Earth has poles, same thing. Now, let's say if you take a magnet, Okay, and this magnet has a north pole and a south pole. Let's say we chop off the south pole, right? Let's say we have this presupposition that if we chop off the south pole, now we're only going to have the north pole wins. No, if you chop off the end of the south pole magnet, right? Now, this big piece that you have that only has north still has a south. Your idea that it doesn't have a south is not true because now we have a new south. The back end on the south end, this new piece is now the south. You cannot take away the south because things exist by their opposite. Things are defined by their opposite. Things mutually arise. You can never get rid of the south pole. So the point about the magnet is that they may be poles apart, but they're together as well. You cannot have one without the other. So we imagine a diagram of poker where the idea of polarity is the opposite end of the diameter. So try to imagine, right? Really try to deeply imagine. Don't just listen to my words like music, but engage with me. Think about this. Try to imagine that these absolutely opposite realms that have nothing in common, this loose aggressive poker player and this nid, we think are somehow absolutely different. In poker, we have been taught to think eccentrically, not concentrically. It's absolutely fundamental to understand that life and death, black and white, good and evil, being and non-being, come from the same center. They imply each other. You cannot have one without the other. But this is the necessary jump to be able to expand one's mind, is to be able to challenge our current beliefs, because the mind always wants to create a particular identity, but identities only exist in opposition to something else. And why do we want that identity, that this is the kind of poker player we are, this is the kind of plays that we make? Because we have the image that this is how other people play. But actually, if we want to get to a high level, we don't know how they play. So all these presuppositions about what we should do are bullshit. We're completely limiting ourselves to whatever stakes we're playing right now. But it's a great tragedy that we're playing this game on ourselves. And very unfortunately, it's perpetuated by the way that we're taught. And you think there's somehow the GTO is like a pure tragedy of endless darkness, or exploitable as endless darkness and it's terrible, or this one is absolutely amazing, this is the answer. Oh, but it's the same. We have the idea that we think that somehow there's one without the other. We imagine the possibility where there's a game of poker that doesn't have anything to do with GTO. I mean, or we imagine a game of poker where we don't do any exploits. No, this game is very multi-dimensional, and the vastness of poker is something where all these things have to be incorporated. Absolutely fundamental to being able to get better at poker. The other thing that we forget is that our poker game and our beliefs about poker and other players that we're playing are not separate, because all of the ideas that we have about this is how people do this and our identity is that, we say we think they do this, so now our strategy is that. All the other players that we're talking about are just projections of our own current skill level. And anything we say about any other poker player is simply a reflection of our own knowledge. Now this is very challenging because it's painful to admit, but when we believe this, then we limit ourselves to our current skill level. It's very hard for us to be able to improve, at least efficiently. So the person that tries to go on this poker journey with either identifying with this or that, or mostly this, but a little bit of that, is going to end up perpetuating his blind spots. And the only way that he can fill in these blind spots is by creating illusory beliefs about the game, and stacks on top of stacks on top of stacks, but he will believe his own thoughts, as all human minds do, right? Maybe not all of them. If we're very intelligent, then we will doubt And we will doubt, and we will doubt, because doubt is the fundamental essence of increasing our intelligence. Doubt is the most important capacity that we have. But if we are confused with which one to do, GTO or should I do exploitable, our brain is like a cloud. We become very confused. And rather than getting more GTO knowledge and becoming more clear, in fact, we become more unconscious. We don't get information to find solutions. We get information to expand our perception of the vast range of possibilities that are out there. Poker is not a conflict between two polarities. If you're pulled apart between this is what I think they're doing, but GTO says this, it starts to become very challenging to trust oneself. Because we say, well, I have this thought and I have that thought. And then we get confused. Well, who am I if I have two of these simultaneous thoughts? I'm just going to choose this one. No, the brain has infinities of thoughts in it. Quadrillions, far beyond what we can consciously understand or comprehend. We don't have the capacity, because right now what we have the capacity to comprehend is what we are conscious of. The brain, and where the majority of our decisions come from, is coming from the unconscious. This is a very, very painful thing for poker players, in fact the whole world. But fortunately we understand why our opponents don't do well, because they don't want to look at these particular things because it's difficult, and that's where we find our edge. That's absolutely where we find our edge. Half of us belongs to GTO and the other half belongs to exploitable. We're nowhere, we're nobody, we don't even know what's going on. And it's not about finding, well, this is the solution. It's the opposite. It's trying to deconstruct the current assumptions that we have. It's not about destroying either. It's not about judging and saying this is not right. No, just becoming aware. And in fact, a lot of compassion and a lot of love in sitting after a game, and rather than feeling angry at ourselves or our opponent that we didn't win, or rather than feeling happy and grateful that we won, which is equivalent, you're going to feel better because you won money. Well, why would you even have why does this belief exist? So then we can say, well, because I don't have very much money to live. Okay, so then we can talk about, one could try to figure that out, right? But if one literally has enough money, food and shelter, and they don't have any predators, to be feeling good or bad because you win or lose means that you have the fundamental belief that it matters. So you're not much of a mathematician. You're not much of a game theorist. You're still controlled. You're still a slave of your emotions. But who wants to admit this? No one wants to admit this because it hurts. So we'd rather go back into GTO Wizard and improve to alleviate these emotions when the problem is these painful emotions that arise, and we try to fix them by getting more knowledge. It doesn't work that way. Now, the first thing to understand is, remember that we've been hypnotized. And we have to go through this dehypnosis process, or this dehypnotizing process. Remember that we've been conditioned, and we have to be unconditioned. Remember that we're going to die. Death is coming. And we don't think it's going to happen today. It can happen at any moment. In fact, it always happens now. The seed dies now. And the bud becomes a flower now. And I hear the birds, and it's happening now. All that ever happens is now. Only in the space made available this moment. Nothing ever has happened in the past. Nothing ever happens in the future. So in order to expand our mind, we have to understand how our brain creates this objective reality that has the past and the future superimposed on top of it when we are looking at information. When we see the object, we do not see the object. We see the meaning of the object relative to the information that we have, relative to the totality of our knowledge and its meaning in the context that we are looking. It is absolutely fundamental to make the realization that the past is just our memory and the future is just our imagination. But we've been hypnotized to believe that the past is real. All language, from the time we're 5 years old, we've been conditioned to believe in this language that only uses tenses. But reality simply is. But no society has ever allowed man to live in the moment. Absolutely none. Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, they condition everybody to live in the past. The great golden age of religion, right? But if you look at people like the capitalists and the communists and the socialists and the fascists, they condition you to live in the future. The golden age is in the future. The utopia is coming. When is the revolution gonna come? Then we'll be able to live. Finally, in the future, we'll be able to live. There will be the golden age. So either we're going to believe in the past, that something was wrong in the past, or we're going to believe in the future, something is going to be a certain way in the future. But what is true and what is false? So mind expansion is about differentiating the falsities in our perception of the nature of reality, right? So first of all, there's reality, or I would not say in the nature of reality, but what our perception is. We have to be able to start to identify the contradictions within the society that has been imposed on us through the education system, because our perception at the poker table and the reactions that we have are simply a function of our beliefs. To become a real thinking poker player, a poker player who is interested in truth above feeling secure, means to live here right now and look at the screen and say, who are we playing against? Not constantly imagining about Pio Solver and imagining how our opponent is wrong, but really thinking, what does he have at this moment? Imagining all these different scenarios and really trying to understand how to make EV, not just memorizing some solution to feel good and being a robot and plugging it in. That's not poker. If you think that's poker, you've never played poker in your entire life, and you've never seen a deck of cards in your entire life. Poker is absolutely magnificent. Poker is like water. Poker is absolutely fluid. There's nothing robotic about poker. Only the human mind can believe such a stupidity. Poker is the most magical, mysterious, phenomenal game in the world. There is not a more interesting game that you are able to make a living from than this. There's nothing else to do. There's no other life to live. Poker is the most amazing thing, but in order to be as good as we can at this magnificent game, we have to de-automatize ourselves. We have to become unhypnotized. We have to become a human being, not a fucking robot. We have to become conscious. A story. Once upon a time, in a dimly lit poker room, a seasoned player sat at a table, scrutinizing the hand of cards before him. Unbeknownst to the other players, his mind... A story. Once upon a time, in a dimly lit poker room, a seasoned player sat at the table, scrutinizing the hand of cards before him. Unbeknownst to the other players, his mind was far away from the current game. Instead, he was lost in a whimsical daydream for the future riches and life beyond the poker table. I'll play this hand, and with the winnings, I'll buy into the next poker tournament, he thought, studying his cards half-heartedly. Once I conquer that, I'll have enough to invest in a high-stakes poker game against Tom Dwan. The stakes will get higher and higher until I'm against Phil Ivey. As the current hand unfolded, the poker player couldn't be bothered to pay full attention. His mind was already racing ahead. I'll use the money, from high stakes to invest in my own poker club, and I'm going to make millions of dollars of rake. The place where I'll host exclusive tournaments with Phil Hellmuth and Gus Hansen and Chris Ferguson and Victor Blum. We're going to get them all. His absent-mindedness didn't go unnoticed by his fellow opponents. One of them, sensing an opportunity, tried to bluff his way to victory. But our poker visionary was underrated. I'll try to build a reputation as a poker king. Then the media will cover my legendary games. I'm going to bluff everybody. Sponsors are going to approach me, and endorsements will roll in. I will be the face of poker, and the world will know my name. I'm sorry. I'm supposed to read. Oh, Lord. As the current hand reached its climax, and our dreamy poker player's mind, he was not paying attention. And the other players exchanged puzzling glances, unsure of what was happening. Little did they know that the player was mentally counting his future trillions. With fame and fortune, I'll retire and start a poker academy. I'll teach the next generation of players my strategies, and they'll worship me and bow down. I'll even write a book called The Art of Poker, a Legend's Guide. I'm gonna steal that name. Nah, this guy sounds really cool. So I like this guy, Jesus. Suddenly the dealer snapped him back into reality, asking, "What's your move?" The other players leaned in, eager to see if he'd call or fold. With a nonchalant shrug, he tossed in some chips, not caring about the outcome of the current hand, too busy thinking about his millions. But alas, in the real world, reality, success is not guaranteed by daydreams. The river card turned, sealing the fate of this particular hand. He lost the round, and he was broke. He would have to go back to McDonald's tomorrow. This is certainly a silly example, but it's very important to think about the fact that when we're in hands, there should be no self-referential thought. There should only be thoughts on strategy. There should not be, I'm going to do this in the future, my girlfriend is doing that, I need to do this tomorrow. If we're not 1 absolutely trillion% focused each moment that we're playing, then we're not even trying to play poker. We're not trying to play poker. We're doing something else completely. Maybe we're having fun and we're being entertained. Or maybe there are so many psychological conflicts that are going on, or so many things that are going on in our life, that we need to give ourselves a little bit more love and attention. But the way that we give ourselves love and attention is very often sitting in silence and allowing ourselves to process what's going on. In this information age, we are seeing more than 50 times the information that we would have received 1,000 years ago in Genghis Khan's time, or 2,000 years ago in Jesus Christ's time, or 3,000 years ago in the age of the Egyptians. And because we have so much going on, so much input constantly, we need to be able to sort through it. We need to be able to give ourselves a break. The best time is generally after a poker session, because it's the most efficient. Now, for our life, we can take even more time. But for our poker games specifically, after a session, the most efficient thing is generally to sit for an hour and do nothing. Simply observe all the thoughts and allow all the thoughts to go into all the hands. Hopefully, we're gearing the thoughts a little bit more toward poker, or we can simply observe everything and not try to spin it anyway. That's absolutely fine as well. These things are equivalent. But the point is to be able to understand the unconscious mechanisms which are driving the machine. When we start to really look deeply at hands, we are able to try to understand our opponent's perspective from a different angle. We're able to look at the hand objectively. In fact, if we don't want to meditate, we can simply take a hand history or two or three. If we have a printer, print it off. If we have a phone, look at it. We don't look at any other applications. Take at least an hour. This is a method. I'm not telling you to do it. Absolutely, I'm not telling you to do this. I'm just saying this is one method which is useful when it comes to being able to actually improve and not continue on this track of conflict solution. So taking an hour, not trying to do anything. There's nothing to do. In fact, the mechanism that's trying to go, 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 I'm trying to accomplish something. Watch the thoughts that say, wow, I'm wasting an hour. I could be going and playing poker. See, this mechanism, this voice in the head that is saying that is the same one that wants to acquire knowledge. But again, this is a presupposition, and it's a belief that's been basically forced into us since a very young age. So it's not something that's going to be able to go away so easily. But what we need to do is we need to be able to be conscious of these facts. This is the way that man actually lives, in dreams, in his imagination, in projections. This is how we play. This is not the way that we want to play this absolutely magnificent game that we have such a fantastic opportunity to play. But you see, we having the ability to sit at a computer or look at a phone and be worried about how to play a strategy game, and to not have been born in a third world country where our only concern is how we're going to survive, how are we going to get food, how are we not going to get bitten by mosquitoes. We have an absolutely amazing opportunity, a tremendous valuable opportunity to be able to play an incredible strategy game. And it is such an absolute wastage how unconscious we are. We have to become more present. We have to become more attentive. We have to be able to gather our consciousness. Consciousness is our treasure. And all the methods that we have invented and we have devised down the centuries are nothing but ways to create more consciousness within us throughout all the religions. And it's not only the religions, even in the Enlightenment era, the philosophers started choosing reason over beliefs. And this is exactly what we as poker players have to do. We have to choose reason over beliefs. Now, GTO masters may disagree, but we don't want to fall into that trap. In order to create more fire within us, we have to make poker very passionate. We look at a 5-year-old child and he plays with a dog and they are just absolutely, they're absorbed 100%. They are not daydreaming about paying money in the future, what people think about them, are they having too much fun, are they looking like a child, what if the dog bites me, blah, blah, blah. They're just absolutely, they're completely absorbed like a child. We need childlike intelligence. That is absolutely necessary. And we can learn a lot from children, much more than we can learn from adults. And we can learn a lot more from other mammals. And see how they only have negative emotions and they only have pain when they are threatened. Assuming I'm not speaking about domesticated dogs who are encaged and not treated with the same rights that every other living being should have. But I'm speaking about animals that are put into domesticated places where they're very conditioned. So how can we play with so much inattention around us? Look at our opponents. Are they looking at their phones? Inattention is basically darkness, and attention is absolutely light. And this course or this series of videos that I'm putting out is simply to teach us how to become more aware when we are playing poker. Imagine how much better we would be doing if all of our opponents are looking in their phone or they're daydreaming and we're focused on every single hand. But the reason why that's difficult is because the mind dreams about different things. So it's more interested in YouTube and it makes rationalizations. Oh, well, I'm just playing live, my hourlies or whatever. No, the reason why is because it's painful to pay attention. Because the mind wants to go, 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 do, 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 do. Look at our opponents, they don't pay attention. If we're playing live, oh my god, there's infinities to gain. And it's not about money. If we're playing poker, we don't give a fuck about money. Because poker is such a higher thing than money. Money is simply a utility to be able to get stuff. And of course, we will make way more money if we're playing better. But what are we going to do? We're going to eat that and that's going to feed our soul? Of course not. Money will be able to give us some shelter. Maybe it will give us a good hospital when we need it. It will give us good food when we want it. We can pay for what we need. It basically buys comfort. But comfort does not give that satisfaction that poker does. Science to a child is absolutely satisfying, but to an adult, is it satisfying? Is it scary? How does it feel? All of these are edges that we can get. Poker players go on forums asking each other questions, but nobody knows what they're doing. And they're looking at each other's hand histories and comparing it to PioSolver, gathering information about themselves compared to what other people say about them and their hand histories. And also compared to what a GTO solver says, even though the GTO solver doesn't say anything, it just simply gives an output. And we create our own meaning. We create our own meaning. GTO doesn't create it. And we can only understand GTO up to the level that we understand. So this idea that there is this objective GTO and there are these objective concepts that we can understand out there in the ether, it's absurd. Obviously the knowledge that we have exists within our brain, and the way that we are experiencing reality is through our five sense perceptions. Right? One way we experience reality is through sight. One way we experience reality is through taste. One is through touch, etc. So why is the opinion of others so important? If somebody says, oh, I'm a weak poker player, why am I angry? Or why am I sad? Why am I absolutely shattered? I wish I had some glass to break. That would be fun. I was thinking I was going to be a great Phil Ivey one day, you know? Right? Because other people have said that that would be a good thing to aspire to. And it would kill me if they said, oh no, you're not as good as you are. It's the opinion of others that we have been trained to depend on. And if we're depending on their opinion, then we will never be able to go beyond them in terms of poker skill. This is absolutely necessary that we turn within ourselves, because there's no way that a brain and another brain have the opportunity to ever bridge the gap in any meaningful way. So we use this thing and it's called language. If you still believe that you are able to express ideas about poker through language, then you have never played poker in your life. It's not possible. So people that are believing that it's possible to convey ideas through language, it's possible a little bit. But remember that there is a speaker and there is a perceiver. And some human beings believe that there's this objective thing called poker, and there's this objective concept that they're going to understand. No. That's not how the brain works. It's not the nature of reality. So if we're continuously looking for what other people are thinking, because we only know that which others think about us. We don't know anything about our own poker game on a deep level. What kind of situation is this? It's absolutely absurd. But this is perpetuated by the training industry. And I don't want to say that, again, what they do is absolutely fantastic, but we as an individual can realize that there's an absolutely fantastic edge that can be gained as a result of this training industry and as a result of people simply wanting certainty. We don't want to tell them about this, right? Of course we do, because we want people to have love and happiness. See, there's this other assumption that, like, oh, we win a little bit less money and they don't, whatever, but really it's not about money. It's about the love of this fantastic strategy game. Poker is so deep. If I cannot know about my game directly, and I can only have a context and then knowledge arises, but I cannot know the entirety of my knowledge directly, unless I become more conscious and more conscious, make the unconscious more conscious through different methods like meditation, through different methods like hand history analysis, and using the knife of logic, not beliefs, strange things will happen. From the inside, I can only know my own poker schema. And when I look in the mirror, I can only see my body. I cannot actually know my understanding of poker in the mirror. When I look in the mirror, I cannot know my consciousness. It's very important to understand that it has to be known directly. I go, I sit, I close my eyes, and I think about the game. I close my eyes and I go into my imagination. In fact, if they are more self-aware, they will realize that their imagination and life are not separate. And day versus night, when they're sleeping and their brain is creating stuff and all this information overload gets processed in our dreams, they would realize that poker is not separate from their dreams. Poker is not separate from anything that we do. We are poker, and poker is absolutely magnificent, but it can become very stressful and painful if we're solving the wrong problems, because it feels like we're just going in a circle over and over and over and over again. We have to know poker directly. It cannot be mirrored. It cannot be reflected in anything. It's absolutely invisible, because what's in front of us? Physical reality. There's a tree, there's a bird, there's grass, there's maybe a deer if we're lucky to be in an area where there's nature, right? So there's those kind of things. But poker concepts exist as our imagination. So when we see a poker table, we obviously don't just see the poker table. If we saw reality, we would have never evolved and survived. If we hear a big sound crash, boom, in back of us, we will have our nervous system will be momentarily hijacked by an association, a meaning of what that is, and we will automatically react. It's called the fight or flight response. Something very similar happens when we are playing poker. This big database, this big bank of information takes in the context and it creates thoughts. If we are identified with simply our current thoughts and we think we are the thinker, we are this person that's thinking, no. The experiencing agent that we are is simply a fractal piece of the entire machine. Now, people that are very not very aware of themselves, which I think that poker players have to be very aware of themselves or else they wouldn't make money. So I would expect that the majority of us are probably somewhat aware, and some of us are probably very aware, or able to make the logical conclusion that we cannot directly know anybody else's knowledge other than our own. Again, we experience reality through 5 senses. Seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, touching. Okay? So how can we use those senses to superimpose ourselves into someone else's brain and get their knowledge? We can't. So again, we use this gap, or we use this bridge called language. But the space between it, the emptiness between it, which is the gap, is fundamental for language. Silence is more valuable than acquiring knowledge, because only when we are silent we can really, really deeply understand the game. Only when we are playing absolutely silently and we are knowing, we're using that deep intuition that we all know that we have. Not simply the mind that we are identified with, but there is a deeper way to make decisions, a deeper way to experience reality and making decisions. Have you ever known anything about poker directly? Have you ever encountered poker directly without bringing someone else's opinion or some pictorial thought about a PioSolver solution into it? If you've not done that, then you've not played poker yet. Poker only starts when we start going inside of ourselves, by looking at ourselves directly through meditation or through investigating hands with logic, but that's much more painful and challenging. Far more efficient, but much more difficult. So, in fact, by sitting and doing nothing, we will understand ourselves, and it will be very difficult to lie to ourselves. Using logic is also very efficient. But poker, in its vastness and beauty, only exists when we're capable of seeing our game as it is, not as the way that someone else thinks about it. So what can we say about that? What can they say about us? What can they say about us, really? What can they say? They can watch our decisions at the table, but they cannot watch us, what is making these decisions, because they don't have access to our knowledge. So if we want to watch ourselves, only we can do that. Nobody else has that capacity. It cannot be done by a poker coach. It cannot be done by some training video master. It cannot. It can only be done by ourselves. We cannot delegate it to a professional. And there are no GTO experts that are going to be able to help us. They may say words, and these words we may take in, and we may process that, and it may be unconscious, and we may say, yeah, it's them that's giving it to us. But we are always the one that is processing everything, that is doing everything. But we're so much interested in other people's opinions. We're absolutely absent when we're playing a hand. We're so much interested in what the GTO thing was yesterday, how many times this guy 3-bet in a row. We're not even thinking so deeply about the hand. We're consumed with feeling annoyed that this guy 3-bet us 3 times in a row, and we can't differentiate between whether or not he's doing it on purpose or it's just a statistical inevitability, and then we don't even know how to play correctly because there's this feeling that we don't want him to get one over on us. But what if he's 3-bet twice and he knows the next time we're probably going to get mad and we're going to 4-bet too often? This might mean that he reduces his 3-bet frequency, and now we're playing directly into a strategy and punting EV. We have to become conscious. We have to wake up. We're deeply sleeping when we're playing, and we have to become aware of what is driving the carriage. What is driving the carriage? So at the end of the videos on YouTube, many videos often give a solution. Of course, there is no solution. The point is to get rid of this mechanism, or not to get rid of it. We don't consciously get rid of it. The way that it evaporates, one could say, is simply watching it, watching this mechanism, because this wanting a solution to alleviate this feeling of, oh, now I see there's something going on, let me find a solution, is simply the conditioning. All we need is awareness, and awareness does not judge it, awareness does not label it, does not assign it any meaning. Awareness is absolutely indifferent. What is the next action that we're going into? Why are we going into this next action? Why? What is driving it? I love you so much, and I'm going to go now, and we will speak with you soon. Love you so much. Goodbye.